Good evening. Sorry to interrupt. Uh, First thing I want to say is thank you for being brave and intrepid souls and coming out to a public event tonight. Uh, Before we do anything else, maybe I can just say my name's Adam Davis. I'm with Oregon Humanities. Maybe actually, you want to just, I said I would introduce you, but it's a little smaller than usual. Maybe just introduce yourselves very quickly and then we'll explain what we're doing and jump in. Does that sound all right?
Sure.
Lori, you want to?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm Lori Chavez-DeRemer. I live in Happy Valley, if you know where that is, in Southeast Portland. I served on the City Council from 2004 to 2010, and then was mayor of Happy Valley from 2010 till 2018. I ran for state representative in 2016 and again in 2018. So that's my political experience, and so I'm excited to have this conversation. I can't quite see everybody. The lights are kind of dark, so
Yeah.
we'll work on that.
Maybe that's good. We'll bring the lights up in
Yeah,
a bit
and we
for
can
sure.
questions.
Yeah, thank you, Lori. Eddie, yeah.
Great. My name's Eddy Morales. I live in the city of Gresham. I'm a Gresham city councilor and the founder of a group called East County Rising, which is helping to transform, I think we have some fans, helping to transform the electorate and the leadership in East Monoma County. I am also the treasurer of the Democratic Party of Oregon and on the board of Planned Parenthood. But consider myself an organizer first. So.
Yeah, and so thanks for introducing yourselves Unplanned. And let me just say this event and why it is that we're excited that Eddie and Lori are here. And I should also say Ana Del Rocio was scheduled to be here as well, formerly on the David Douglas High School board, and who works to help put especially people of color into political office. And Ana is under the weather and made the right decision not to be here. And so, yeah, it's a good decision. And I should say the theme of this Think and Drink series for the whole year is making democracy. And we've talked about a couple different things on the way to tonight, but tonight what we want to be looking at especially is holding office, which also includes running for office. So who decides to try to get into office? Why? What does representation require? What does it look like? And as a way to get there, maybe a couple other framing points, and then we'll jump into a conversation for a bit and then open for questions. And I think it'll be less formal than usual, and it's not usually very formal. It's going to be even less so. Framing. So the reason I think that we have a quieter room than usual is obviously coronavirus, COVID-19. And I guess I want to say that there's something about the last couple weeks that actually raises questions to me that resonate really strongly with questions about holding office. They're questions primarily about responsibility on one side and risk, vulnerability, and exposure on the other. I think about all of that when I think about decisions to hold office. And another way to say that, maybe from a slightly more distant perspective, is who do we look to when we're trying to organize ourselves? How is it that we arrange ourselves? Who steps up? Where is existing leadership? Where is existing structure? And how does that structure, what do we count on for that? What are the expectations and the things in place that make that work? And often that's tied to specific individuals. Usually with Think and Drink, we try not to get too wrapped up in the news cycle. We're trying to look forward, long term. And in this case, we're trying to think about what makes democracy strong and what's challenging for democracy over the long term. Hope we can do some of that tonight too, mainly through the work and the stories that you bring with you.
You want to recreate the news cycle here?
Right here? I'm not that good an actor, but we can try. What I do want to do, I want to say a couple thanks really quickly and then ask you a couple questions for applause to help Lori and Eddie get a sense of you and the room. But first, just a couple quick thanks. First, to make this possible and other events like it, National Endowment for the Humanities, part of the federal government. Oregon Cultural Trust, part of state government. And then we can hold applause for some of these unless you want, if you really want to clap, but Yeah, you're very excited. That's great. Thank you, Miriam, for being excited in the front row. Stoll Reeves, Tonkin Torp, the Kinsman Foundation, and the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. So even if you're excited, I said those quickly, but thank you to them for hosting it, helping us make it happen. And then some community partners that have helped get the word out and generally with the whole series. And these community partners are actually doing work that's closely related, I think, to politics, whether it's explicitly political or not. And I'm just going to name all these organizations quickly. Next up, Oregon Latino Health Coalition, the League of Women Voters of Oregon, and the League of Women Voters of Portland, PCOON, Unite Oregon, and Right Around Portland. So maybe a big thanks to those community partners. So that's how these events happen all around the state. I want to ask you a couple questions if you could answer with applause or some noise-making mechanism. Don't throw things, please, unless you have something soft. The first, just to get a sense, if this is your first one of these Oregon Humanities Think and Drinks, could you make a little noise? If you've been to one of these before, could you make a little noise? Thank you to members of both groups. I'm glad you're here. These questions will get slightly more complicated. If you have held any elected office at any stage, including middle school student government, if you've ever been elected to any position, could you make a little noise?
That's good.
I don't think I could clap for that. Last one, more complicated question. If you have a sense that the expectations we have of our office holders align strongly with the conditions in which they work, could you make a little noise? Okay. So, don't understand the question? Perfect. Then we're set. We're going to start. And we'll get into it, I hope. So, Lori and Eddie, maybe we can start on the question of office holding. If you could each just say a word about sort of, maybe Lori, we'd start with you. Like, how and when did you first decide, I'm going to run for this office? What kind of crazy, harebrained set of things set that in motion?
Okay, there's a couple. Specifically, when I moved to Happy Valley in 2000, so I had twin daughters. We'd never been to Oregon before. My husband was taking a job at Kaiser, and I had twin 6-year-olds who were starting in first grade. So I put him in first grade. Happy Valley was about 3,500 people at the time. I had a business degree. I wasn't really thinking I was on PTA. I was making sure that I was trying to assist them in anything I could as far as school-related went. And then I saw an article in the paper as Happy Valley was growing. One of the city councilors was resigning because they were moving out of the state of Oregon. And I remember bringing this little newspaper home and saying to my husband, look, I think I could run a city. Kind of as a joke. You know, I mean, it was 3,500 people. I grew up in rural California, small farming community. Happy Valley at that time was just very small. And I thought, I want to participate. I want to give back. I thought, well, that's something of interest to me. So I come over and he comes to my house and he brings me this huge folder of forms that are people who had donated either for the 4th of July fireworks or the Happy Valley hikers. It was all of those. And he said, organize this, raise $10,000 for the next 4th of July. And I'm like, okay, I could probably do that. So I did, and I raised the money, and I thought, I'm running for city council because I'm pretty sure if I'm dedicated like this about my kids and my family, other people care about that who don't have the time, and I had the time. So I ran for city council in 2004. I sat after sitting on the parks for 2 years, and then I won my city council seat. And that's kind of when I thought, this is good work. People have to do it. We were volunteers, a volunteer city council. We still are today, family, and what was important to raising them.
Yeah, your family, and at some point you had the thought, I could run a city.
Yeah.
That's good.
It's done that. And in a lot of ways, I was like the first in my family to do a lot of things. First to being a community organizer myself, working on electoral campaigns. We moved back here at the beginning of 2016.
Okay.
And I remember being really excited that we were going to have a woman president and that we were going to crack this glass ceiling. And we were watching the election results at my home with my nephews and nieces, and my sister became a U.S. citizen in 2016 so that she could vote. And so my family had dinner earlier that cycle, and we voted together over dinner. Um, and on election night, I remember seeing, I was working, so I was sending results to people and my own analysis of what was happening and what precincts weren't being counted in Florida. And I remember like the feeling in the room with my family going from excitement to fear. Now, although all my nephews and nieces are born in the US, some of them are still mixed families. And I have also nephews and nieces who are undocumented. And I remember my great nephews and nieces like tearing up because of the promises that this president had made about what he was going to do with undocumented people. And Hugh and I like looked at each other and we were like, as your gunkles, we're gonna work harder than ever to make sure nothing happens to our family and to our friends and to our community. And we started hosting house parties just to get the community together. And the first call we put out, we had like 30 people who came to our home. And we wanted to talk about making Gresham a sanctuary city so that our undocumented population felt welcomed and safe. But when we brought our issue forth, the community responded with a whole different set of issues. Some people had issues that there was no sidewalks in front of their homes. Other people had issues that there was no parks in Gresham, in a parks district. And it immediately became really overwhelming, all the issues that people brought to the table. We had one more house party, and more people came to that one. And we called the question. We said we could keep meeting up and having good food, good company, and feeling comfort with one another, good wine, and good tequila, and or we can like do something about it, right? And we did. We ended up creating a PAC called East County Rising. And from the beginning, we decided to make it a people PAC. So it's $20 a year to be a member. And the members include people who are on public assistance to people who are well-to-do and off attorneys, you know. And we said, we're gonna get people involved in elections and in voting and in participation. Well, once we started doing that, then we said, well, we should ask people to run for office. And it was crickets. Like, people were like, it was like the Matrix, right? Like,
You run for office.
and I remember Hugh said, well, why don't you do it? You have nothing to lose from, I mean, we've been together 17 years. He really does love me. You have nothing to lose. We have free time and we have a privilege to be able to do this. And you have an authentic story that will inspire and get other people to see that they can themselves can run for office. And so on the last day to file, I filed to run for office. And I filed against the president of our city council.
Okay.
Who didn't see it coming. And he complained that he didn't see it coming, and so he wasn't prepared to campaign, which is a whole nother set of problems with people who don't campaign. And so we won by 59 votes.
And that story is maybe one to talk more about in a bit, is how the races themselves go. But there are a couple things that came up in what both of you said that maybe we can go a little deeper into. One is crickets. That is the idea that, oh, you want me to run for office? Actually, like, I want to run anywhere but for office. I want to run from the possibility. And then maybe after that, we can talk a little bit about what I think you started with, which was a sense of responsibility. Maybe that's something we can move towards. But for starters, like, there are so many reasons, it seems like, that many of us think, no way, I wouldn't. So let me just ask, in your head, what are the reasons that other people don't run for office or don't think of themselves as potentially holding office? And for yourself, too, what stands in the way or stood in the way of your thinking yourself that way?
I think it can be both an internal analysis and an external one, right? So internally, it's what does it even mean to run for office and be that leader? We're leaders in our homes, we're leaders at work, we're leaders in our communities, but sometimes when you're leading the public, you have to automatically realize that 50% are gonna love you and 50% are gonna hate you right from the beginning before they maybe even know you. And then as your work moves, that might go up or go down. So that internal analysis of, can I be that leader despite what the issues are that people might bring forward? If the common goal is, and what you just mentioned, we had very common goals. It ended up being maybe more on a federal level and a national level for you, but it really came down to what can I do right in my own community, right? And that, what came out, the parks and the schools and where we feel like a community and all that. So that's the internal analysis about doing the day-to-day work, as well as, can I be that really effective leader and get people to want to buy into what the message is, or listen to the message and then actually deliver on it. So that's one.
Okay.
The external is actually filing the paperwork, deciding if you can take the time from your daily job. Can you take the time to go to the meetings? Is your spouse or significant other going to support you in that? Are you raising kids? It's all of those things. And in small communities, and again, I'll say in Oregon, we have 241 cities. Happy Valley, being now 24,000 people, is number 35 in size. Most cities in Oregon are 5,000 or less. So you have volunteers doing that work. Well, moms and dads who work all day can't always volunteer. Meetings are at night when their kids are in school. So it's all of those things to assess about actually moving forward and then raising the money to do the campaign and so forth. Years ago, unlike 2016 and 2002, in these small cities, you couldn't get people to volunteer, even on the committees, because we're a small community, and you know, you're either the coaches and all these other things, and now we want you to run for city council and make all these policy decisions for your city. So there's lots of analysis to do, because it takes a lot of work, whether you're paid or not paid. You committed to the people to do it. By the time, I mean, when I first started, 10 hours a week is maybe what you would do. You go to the city council, you'd read your packet, you made sure you were up on it. You couldn't just show up, because the staff had put in all that time to talk about what the policies were. It was your job to make sure you knew the information. You know, 16 years later, you know, I was putting in 35 hours a week on a volunteer basis. Whether you go to county meetings, state meetings, you're lobbying at the you know, we don't all have lobbyists. Gresham has a lobbyist. Hillsborough has a lobbyist. Beaverton, small cities. Portland clearly has a lobbyist, but Happy Valley doesn't. So the mayor's lobbying in Salem for what their issues are. So it's just about deciding that, and whether that's school board or whether that's, you know, any other water districts. All of those things take lobbyists and people to say, what's our issue right here at home, and then how does it expand? Because if you're feeling it, your neighbors are probably experiencing the same thing, and so how do you make it better for them? And those are they take some time. You can't, I mean, you can just file, but you had a real reason for filing as well as I did, even though it started small.
And you said right from the start, one of the things you had to reckon with was this idea that suddenly 50% of the people are not going to like you.
Yeah.
And then there's a question of time. There's the question of, do you have resources so that you can literally afford to do this? Mm-hmm. Eddy, you talked a little bit about, well, what's the example in front of me for this? Like, that's right. First to finish college, first to run for office. So can you talk a little bit about what stands in the way for you and maybe for other people now that you've been working on this kind of thing for a while?
Yeah. I think we can't divorce running for office from like the larger societal things that perpetuate women still doubting themselves, women still making less than men for the same job, people of color constantly being told and monitored, right? Like we had on the Democratic presidential side the most diverse slate of people, and we ended up with 2 older white men. Yeah.
How does that happen, though? Seriously, when I think about that, how does that happen when the primary voters are the voters and they're what's happening there? What's the disconnect?
And so I think for the point I'm trying to make is that, and you were getting to this too, like internally, people have, up until the time that they're running for office, and maybe people through their whole lives, have been told that this system is not set up for women, that this system is not set up for people of color, that this system is not set up for people who did not attend an Ivy League school, for people who are high school dropouts, for people who come from low income and poor backgrounds. And so it's like it feels like an insider game. It seems like there's an anointed group of people. It feels like there's a whole lot of work that you need to do, whether it's like serve on a committee, to put into place before you can be ready to run. Yeah. And very little emphasis is put on people's lived experience as being enough to help people inform good policy for the solutions that they lived the problems of, right? And so, it's like, I will always be and do my best to try to be a good ally to women and to make sure that I'm owning responsibility for this system that has been created by men and set up for men to benefit from. But there is no substitute for a woman leading in these positions and being at the decision-making table, right? And so we have to figure out how we are dismantling these larger systems. I know that studies have shown that you have to ask a woman like 3 times to run for office before she'll even consider it. Like she'll avoid the question, she'll recommend other people over her, talk about her qualifications. I think when 2016 happened, it knocked open the Overton window, right? About what is possible and who as a society we hold to be, and when I ran, I think I did that too for a lot of communities, about what is possible and what it requires to run for office. It's not like the system of hundreds of years ago, where you have to come from royalty or highly educated to do this. Since I've ran, just to give you an example, like this last school board election in May, we recruited 11 people to run for school board. 10 of those were people of color, and 10 of those won, right? And it was people who were teachers, who had worked in the schools, who had kids in the school district, who themselves had gone through the school district. And so their experience, having been in the classroom in one of those ways, was more valuable than someone who had studied education or was doing real estate transactions in the city or in that district, right? And so
I feel like you're making an argument about representation. Like who ought to be in these representative positions? In a way, the question is, I guess, Lori, when you put the question back to Eddy, you said, like, why is that happening? Why is it the case that there are 2 older white guys there? But I want to kind of keep it close to home rather than out there if we can. And maybe follow this question about gender or other parts of personal identity and how those do or don't show up in this question of whether to run.
Yeah, I think in any community, whatever you're representing, people want to have a reflection of the representative reflecting who they are, right? Whatever that is. But demystifying that takes time, effort, and money, and follow through. I don't care who you are. I'm a woman. I'm Hispanic. My grandmother just passed away, 97 years old, from Mexico. And people don't know that if I sit on the Republican side. Now, I say that. It doesn't matter in a local office. We're nonpartisan. We represent everybody. And that was what was great about running at local office. You are focused on what the people of your city want. As you move up in a different office, a state representative, it's when the party stuff comes in. But that being said, we don't share much different experience. I wasn't born in Mexico. My dad wasn't born in Mexico, but my mom is Irish, and she's she's a closer generation to coming over here. All of those things, a sister who's a teenage pregnancy, growing up in a rural community where both parents worked. That was my upbringing. I wasn't afraid to run for office. Now, maybe that might have been a little bit different in a larger city at first, right? It becomes where you run and what you're familiar with. I was, at that time, the only woman councilor to serve. I was the only female mayor ever elected, and now there's 5 men councilors back on the city council. But again, I tried to appoint as many women as possible, but we represent men as well. So I don't want to say, I thought the best balance was a mix, men and women together, right? We just offer a different dynamic when we can sit in the room. The testosterone backs up, the women step up because men can and often will respect a woman's opinion. If women state their opinions very, what we say is important. And I think that they have to value that, but we have to keep saying it. There's no mystery to that. We know we've come from a generation before us and before that where we've had to work a little bit harder, and we're willing to continue to do so. But I didn't feel that fear. I didn't feel it also running for state representative, as far as that I wouldn't be accepted if elected. Now, I didn't win the state representative race in 16 or in 18. But that doesn't keep me from continuing to fight for what's important to Happy Valley at the state level. And so that's kind of the stuff we have to do. We have to represent our businesses, represent our citizens, but we have to demystify that. And that's where the money factor, I hope we talk about that a little bit, because it takes money to educate the voter, just because they don't know who we are. It isn't because they're not smart, it's just they don't know who we are, and how do we get the message out? And sometimes that takes a lot of money to do so.
So let's go to money in just a minute, but you said you used the verb represent several times, and that's such a complicated idea.
Correct.
And so maybe just like, what the hell does that mean? We gotta represent, like, we gotta represent our district, or we gotta represent the men as well as the women. Or we, Eddie, when you think about what it means to represent a group or an individual, what does it mean?
Yeah, I think I'll say two things about this. One is to your initial question. When I ran and why I picked the president, it wasn't because I thought that the president was like the most out of touch person on the council, or the person that I disagreed with the most. Actually, the feedback that I kept getting from people was like, that's one of the hardest working people on that council. Why are you going after him? And when I ran, I was running on a representation platform that council needed to reflect the people that lived in that city. And I'm just going to run through some quick stats.
Great.
So before I ran, that council was mostly men. So out of the 7, 5 were men. All but 1 were white. And the average age of that council was, I believe, 72 years old. The city's average age is 35.
Okay.
The city's people of color population was 37%. And the majority of those people at that council lived in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't have districts. And and it's definitely the wealthiest neighborhood in our city. Whereas 1 in 5 people in Gresham were living at federal poverty levels. So there was a big disconnect. And when I looked, and the majority of that council was Republican. And I know it's not, those bodies are not meant to be partisan, but you do kind of get a sense of what values people bring, or agendas people bring to the table. I looked at the numbers in Gresham, and like I already shared some of the stats about what the demographics look like, but it was twice as many Democrats in Gresham than Republicans. And of course, unaffiliates being the largest group of people. And so I kept thinking to myself, like, why is this the case? Like, why is it that this board that makes decisions for this whole city doesn't reflect that? The largest and most populous neighborhood in Gresham is a neighborhood called Rockwood.
My daughter teaches there.
And no electeds from that area on this, right? And it's the most populous in a non-districted city. And when we started looking at the numbers, it was that a lot of people of color, young people, low-income and poor people were not voting. And so what we set out to do first was to get that community to vote, and to get that community to connect the issues that they cared about to this decision-making board, right? So these people are the ones who are deciding whether you have rent increases or any protections as renters, whether your streets are getting paved or your sidewalks. And there was a huge disparity, right, in our city about our roads have been paved 2 times since I've lived there. There are streets in Rockwood that for 30 years have not been paved, don't have sidewalks. I remember meeting 2 women in wheelchairs who couldn't leave their homes because there was gravel roads in front of their houses, right? And so this group of people was not caring for everyone in the city. And so I made it my point to turn out the vote there. And when I ran, we beat Barack Obama turnout numbers in Gresham, which is sort of the gold standard for turnout. I had lost on election night. I think I told you the story.
But nobody, I mean, it's actually a hell of a story.
So I raised money We hired community members. We spent all of our time we knocked every precinct in Gresham, but we made sure that this part of town got a lot of attention, and we went after voters who normally don't vote. You know, when you run for office, everyone's like, go for the 505 voters, send them a lot of mail, send them digital, they're gonna vote for you and they're the ones who decide. And I said, that hasn't worked here in Gresham. I'm gonna go after the people who don't vote, and I'm gonna try to make a compelling case for why they should vote. And then I'm gonna help them get to the polls. And we did that. And on election night, I lost by 1,500 votes. And I remember I feel guilty sometimes about this because I'm like, dang, I should have listened to the consultants. Like, I bet on low-income and poor people and people of color, and they let me down, right? But by the end of the week, I was only down like 28 votes. So all of these people that had never voted just voted at the very last minute. But they did vote for me.
Yeah.
And then by the next week, I was up 18 votes. And my opponent had already had a victory party, and I said, I hope crow tastes good. For those of you who don't know, in Monoma County, after an election, there's a lot of ballots that get challenged, right? And so the county sends a letter to everybody and says, your vote's not going to count because your signature didn't match your ID.
You didn't bubble it in right. You have to, it didn't qualify for whatever. So yeah, you have to chase those ballots.
And I remember I got this list from my incredible campaign manager who's here, Luz Reyna, who now runs East County Rising. And there was 400 votes that were going to be challenged. They were giving us 5 days to go fix those ballots. And when I looked at the list, half of them were like Latino surnames. And the other ones were like, when we looked them up, older, probably voted regularly. And I said, I'm only up 18 votes. If half of that list is going to be disqualified, then I'm going to lose. And I put out a call to the community. I said, we have to help these people fix their ballots. They're not going to go down to Portland from Gresham, 45 minutes, to fill out a form when they already voted and there was already a lot for them to do. Yeah. So we assembled our volunteers, like 50 people came to our campaign office, that we're gonna go chase all these people down. And we did, and we corrected, I think, like 70 ballots. And the last person that we collected was a guy who I call Mr. 59, I won't say his name. But he had been working at a blueberry farm since like 4 a.m. And we'd been trying to get a hold of him all week. And this was Friday at 4 p.m. And the kids were like, he did vote for Eddy because he looked like us. And his story resonated with us, like his kids. And he did vote for you, and he was excited about it. So Luz went to pick him up after work and drove him all the way down to Portland. And he got to count, his vote got to count like at 4:49 on Friday of the last day to collect a ballot. So we won by 59 votes. And that is what it means to be representative, right? To try to get people to participate and then to hold people's hand through a really scary process that may be foreign to them, whether it's running for office or even voting for some people or volunteering or making your first political donation. That is all for a lot of people new, right? And scary.
When we're talking about representation, though, these councilors in small cities or mayors, I touched on it a little bit earlier about depending on the size of the city, and I believe Gresham gets paid for being a city councilor, correct? So somebody like Happy Valley, there are several cities around the Portland Metro who do not get paid, so it's that volunteer time. So what you're finding is there's not a lot of young people who can run because they're either in school, they're raising families, as I mentioned. So you do get a lot of the retirees. And what happens is they get elected on council, there's no term limits in their city, nobody else steps up, so they rerun and run. And Happy Valley doesn't have term limits either. I could have continued to run as mayor. But I do believe in new blood. I do think at any point when you have served your community and you can follow through, and as Eddy will tell you, he's just learning in his first year, the train turns very slow in politics as far as public when you're making policy. So sometimes you want to see your stuff through. You start something, people have come to you with a problem and you want to see it through, and 4 years later it still hasn't happened and you want to choke the government because we are the government and you want to choke us because we can't move it faster, but the public plays into that. So they rerun and they want to see something through, and before you know it, they're on 12 years, 15 years, 16 years. It is what happens. And I'm sure that those counselors are not sitting here thinking, I just want to put a foothold on who we're representing. So that being said, when people like you step up, I do think it's important for people to go, yeah, let's take a look at what we're offering. But as far as the intricacies of running for office, and then when you're serving, the policies on how it works, just an example that you brought up, you mentioned the roads. And I didn't know this when I ran. So I'm like, you're right. Why are we paving only some of the roads and not all of the roads? Well, it is much more detailed about where money can go in the budgets. It becomes almost crazy. And that's not really a topic for tonight. But when you're managing that space that you're in, it's not as easy as it seems when you're talking about funds and where they can go and what comes from the state and what can be paved and when a city does their budget. And a lot of councils in small cities are conservative-based councils because you don't have a large budget, right? Your tax base is very small. Everything else is dependent on state funding, and that you have to wait for that money to come back to the city in order to use it. So some roads, while they're at capacity, a brand new road will get paved again before an old road, is because it's cheaper to pave that road and keep it up to capacity if it's high use rather than an old road. And it just, so you have to have your counselor say, no, we're going to dedicate a certain amount for that. But that's fighting for it. But the intricacies are not as easy as maybe you would think they are. And you probably see that in Portland a lot with your counselors. You know, they're running one bureau at a time, and that can be very convoluted and complicated. But knowing that is not always an easy process, but it's part of it.
It's so funny that you brought up that example, because I'm still, in terms of values and approach and priorities, the minority on our council. And so every time we discuss, an initiative that we're doing, and so we're doing this initiative to try to invest $100 million into our roads. I said, why don't I see on this map the roads that haven't been paved, the ones that I remember walking? And the answer that was given to me was, well, it's cheaper to fix the roads that we already have than to go and do those. And I said, well, when does that community get its turn?
When your council decides that that's where the priority of the budget goes, but then that's that other 50% that you're arguing against. So it's not that it can't be done. It just has to be really focused when you're wanting to improve one area to do so.
But having gotten the perspective and having walked those roads, I knew to look on that map and know that those roads weren't on there.
Ignored.
And were ignored. And so it does require us to
be engaged,
bring that up, draw attention to it. And do that. And so I remember my very first council meeting. It was a housing task force meeting. And I was watching, I didn't even know what I was doing yet. And the whole thing is being done in English. But a lot of the people that are there in the community were not English speakers. And so I sent a message to one of the receptionists and I said, hey, we have people who can't participate in this conversation because they don't speak English. Can you get them some translation? And without thinking twice, we don't do that. And so I then had to translate for some of these people, which put me in a really awkward position. I brought that up the next day and I said, if we want all of our community to participate, then we need to be thoughtful about how we break down these barriers for participation. So that next day we ended up hiring and promoting, and then promoting people who spoke different languages within the city. Now all of our material is done in at least 7 languages. We went out and bought translation equipment because we didn't even have that, because they said, well, I'll translate, just give me the equipment. Like, we don't have the equipment. So we had a big blind spot by not having somebody who understood what it was like to grow up with a mom and a dad who did not speak English, and how that was a barrier for them to be able to participate in simple things as like paying for groceries at the store, right? And so then another time, like I went to a meeting and they were only going to feed our counselors, and community was going to watch us eat in front of them. And I said, in my culture, that's really disrespectful, right? And we are expecting people to come here in the evenings after work and not provide food. So now we provide food at stuff. Because I boycotted my meal. I like made a
Uh-huh.
scene and pushed it away.
So can I kind of want to come in here because it's interesting even to think about the languages that need to be spoken. And one of the languages that is being spoken on this stage right now, in addition to English, with the question of Spanish behind it, is like the language of money, which has been already, it's just been shot through what you've been talking about, whether it's been budget or higher translation equipment, or like, how do you get elected? How do you get, and Eddie, you work around the country raising money. And Lori, the race you ran for state rep, I think at the time was the most expensive race for state rep
Ever in
ever
Oregon's
yet
history.
in Oregon.
Yeah, 2016. It was a $2 million race.
A $2 million race.
When I moved here in 2000, I believe at that time the state representative races were just about 300,000. That was
Okay.
kind of the top race. You were looking at your local council races and mayor's races at, 10, 15,000, your county races at 40, 50, 100, and yeah, mine since 2016 has been shot out of the water already, but I was I raised $1 million, and I think my opponent at the time raised $1 million too.
So in a way, the way I want to put the question is like politics, especially the way it's spoken about, and sometimes it feels like even local politics, even at the smallest level, is about the words people use and the values that they talk about.
That's right.
But then it can also feel like, yeah, but what it's really about is money.
Is money.
Both in order to get in the positions and in order to do the work.
Sure.
And so can I just ask, like, how does money show up for both of you, and how is it related to the values that we talk about when we talk about politics?
Yeah. Well, if we're talking again on local races, much different than your state and your federal races. But let's just talk about state race for a moment. If anybody finds anything of value and they believe that you're going to carry the water as the candidate, right? They want to pay for that. And I don't care what side you sit on. You can sit on Democrat, you can sit on Republican, you can sit on Independent. If they have a platform and a mission that they're wanting to believe that you're going to carry that water, they're going to put money behind it. And that happened clearly in my state rep race. $1 million on my side and $1.2 million on the other side. So it really didn't matter about buying that. You've got your PACs. You have a PAC. Right. Your goal in raising money is to get people elected in office, and that's going to take money. So there's no way we can all sit back and act like, well, it's just values and morals for me.
Sure.
It's just a lie, and I would be remiss to say that that's the truth. And I think anybody sitting here who's interested in this would have to just recognize that and then decide where's your line. And I think that that's where your personal values and morals can come into play and say, I do have a line. I will not. And as mayor, I had friends, right? You grew up in the city, you friends, and you'd be like, oh my God, you're the mayor. When I get a speeding ticket, I'm going to call you, right? And you're like, nope, you're not calling me. You have to set that line right away, because how easily is it that you're going to be able to move? And so that's when your personal commitments and values and honesty and integrity come into play. And you just have to set the stage. Now, does that mean a friend won't call you and say, hey, listen, I'm having a land use problem and I'm really not understanding what's happening and I feel confused by this process. It's convoluted and complicated and it seems unfair. Well, come in, let's talk about it and let me present it, and then be unbiased when, say, I had a conversation with my neighbor about this, because that is my job. I'm supposed to listen to the people who want to talk to me about a crosswalk or an issue or police matter that they feel is. But if you were speeding through the school zone that said 40 and it was clearly posted, and you just came to me and said people are speeding through and they're going to kill my kids, but the school mom is running the speed limit every single time, I'm not going to help you get out of your speeding ticket, because that is what the community asked for, was safety, and I want to provide that safety. So that was it. As far as the state stuff, right. I mean, who wants your support and what do you need to raise it? And again, it's to educate the voters. It became less the second time because people knew who I was. It didn't take as much money to get your name out there and get in front of people, but it does take money, and people want to purchase your ear. And I said, you could purchase my ear always. You cannot purchase my decision, because I had to make sure that my filter was fair and reasonable to the people that I was representing.
Okay, that's actually a really provocative way to put it. You can purchase my ear, but you can't purchase my decision. Eddie, you work nationally, really in the area of fundraising for political candidates, and then you also are in a seat, very local seat. How do you think about how money shows up in both kinds of work that you do?
So two things. When I ran, I didn't take corporate dollars. I was resourced by individuals and
No unions?
and unions, which are a bunch of workers putting their money together for representation and voice and power.
And corporations behind the unions. Saying.
I didn't take any corporate dollars, and I'm not saying that people who do, I'm not making that a blanket or value statement. I'm saying that this was my case.
Yeah.
And for me, every time I got a $5 donation,
Yeah.
a $10 donation, a $500 donation, a $1,000 donation, they all meant a lot to me. You know,
Yeah.
you opened this conversation about vulnerability, and when you're in that hot seat, it takes a lot of courage to run.
Yes, it does.
And it's one of the most humbling experiences. You're exposed. And every time someone gave me $1, it was like affirmation that I was doing the right thing and for the right reasons. And that's where I was going with the individuals. So it was like one more person that was behind me. Every time somebody signed up to volunteer for me, it like humbled me. Every time someone liked a comment that I put on social media, it meant I watched every single one of those things. And I felt at the end that I had a relationship with every single one of those people that touched my campaign in some way. Now, I end up raising more than anyone had raised in Gresham for a city council race. I think by the end, I probably raised in 6 weeks $150,000. But I was still in the driver's seat about how I chose to spend that money. And that is important because as candidates, you are the CEO. You have people telling you what they think you should spend the money on. And again, you're vulnerable and you want to listen to everybody because they must be right. And you don't want to be the person who ruins your own campaign.
Well, you've worked so hard. I think you want to win. You do. You've put a lot in, and you think that you're best candidate to win. So you do have to watch and be your own driver in that seat. And I would say that for anybody, and I agree with you 100%. Is you make the final decision. As a business owner, you sign every check. You have to pay attention to your value statement and not let anybody else run your show.
And I say that because you get to allocate the budget. And I knew that it was going to be a lot more expensive to go to people who had never voted and talk to them 2 or 3 times at their door in person to tell them why, like, one, to ask them what they cared about, to 2, make the connection between what they cared about and voting, and then walk them through how to vote, right? And that's more expensive than buying a mailer or buying social media posts, which also are the most ineffective ways of getting new voters out to vote. And so I do think money plays an important role. I do think we also need major reforms in this state around money. I think we're really great with transparency, right, about where money's coming and going. But I do think we still have work to do around putting caps on money so that people are expected to go out and raise more money for more people as opposed to just having 1 or 2 wealthy individuals who can bankroll their stuff.
So there's so many things coming up here, including this question, I think, this idea of noticing Facebook likes and really feeling deeply grateful to every individual who gave you any money. And I just want to say that sounds super intense and draining in all sorts of ways, and also charging in lots of ways. And charging is in, you then feel like you owe these people something. And so I guess I want to ask 2 questions there, and you go with either direction. One is the relationship between feeling like you are responsive to each one of them. I mean, you can't really be responsive to everybody that gives you money or everybody that asks something of you. And it gets back to what you said about having to make the decision. So I want to ask about that, about how you ultimately know what or who you most have to be responsive to.
You have to set your own personal line right up
Where
front.
does it come from? When you, for you, how did you know where?
I mean, mine comes from my values, how I was raised, how to respect people's money, how to respect people's time, how to respect people's words. What are they coming for? How passionate are they? What is the reason that they want me to change something? Because usually people come to you when they want to. It's very rare you will get I mean, we got a lot of affirmations is thank you so much for doing something, right? But they got something for that. You're making policy on a local, we're not trading favors in local government. And you shouldn't be trading favors in the state and federal government, but again, we know what happens all around on these machines and these PACs and these dollars, and we're fools if we ever believe that isn't happening. We just have to do our best to counter it all the time. And I will tell you, local government is where you can really make a difference and be honest, because you have to see everybody that you know, either in the grocery stores, you're going to school with them, you're working with them, you're exchanging businesses with them. You cannot be a liar and a cheater and a fraud with their tax dollars that they're funding their city that they get to make decisions for. That's where the line comes from. You just have to know what you're representing and be honest about it and be fair and reasonable and say, my money's in there too, because you have to live in the city in order to run the city. So every decision I make with the council, it affected me as well. I wouldn't want to make a bad decision that's going to affect my family, and I certainly don't want it to affect your family. So I made a lot of decisions early on based on my family, because I knew what I was thinking was probably what they were thinking. My kids are now 25 and 26. They don't live here. My daughter lives in Portland and she teaches in Gresham. My other daughter lives out of state. We do business all over. Now I'm doing it for their kids. So that was what it was. It was those decisions about how will it trickle down and affect their families, their businesses, and their everyday lives. And I wanted to make my core mission and core values of the city what they believed in and what they wanted. So it didn't seem hard to make those decisions if you just stay above board. You just got to stay above board.
Yeah. I mean, what do you feel, or who do you feel most sort of accountable or most responsive to as you're trying to adjudicate between all sorts of potential investments or allocations, or how do you do that?
So a mentor of mine named Heather Booth taught me this thing early on. She said, to be an organizer, you have to really love people and you have to hate injustice. And that is the way that I live my life. And I treat every person who text with that kind of love and respect. And sometimes I get people who reach out, who are reaching out to tell me all the ways that I'm not the person that they want in this position.
Yeah.
But it's still, I still receive it with that same sort of love and patience and humility.
Grace.
And grace.
And grace. Got to give a little grace.
But ultimately, I find myself in this position of privilege and being here to try to make sure and serve the most vulnerable in our communities. Myself and people who are of my socioeconomic background now don't have a hard time finding lawyers, lobbyists, or the time to go and the courage to advocate for ourselves, right? I'm not afraid of politicians. I'm not afraid to say what is on my mind. But that came with like years of working on that and a growth out of the socioeconomic background that I was born into. And so those people are going to find their way to me. Yeah. And I'm much more interested in the people that are working 3 jobs, that don't even understand that we're the ones making decisions that affect their lives, and reaching out to them more proactively. I listen to everyone in our city. I care about everyone in our city, but those are the voices that I really put the effort to make sure that our staff at the city are reaching out to, that we're partnering with local groups that are working with these communities to make sure that those voices are represented. and that's what I hold. It's so funny. So you're asking these questions that in preparation for today. My team, I work with a team called the Voter Journey people that are here. And we're like, what are the 6 tips that we can give people who are thinking of running for office about how to follow leadership from their community?
Yeah.
And so then we created a survey and I sent it to a lot of local elected officials and told them to share their tips with us.
Okay.
So we created a PDF for everybody who's listening and who's here that they could download on our website, which is just eddymorales.com, EDDY. And it's my 6 tips on what you can do to do all of these things that you're asking about. So shameless plug, but
good.
Go download it.
That didn't seem shameless.
That was pretty good. I want to ask 2 last short questions and then open to questions here. The first question is, I think, short, and it's a little bit of a departure from where we just were, but it goes back to your sense that you had lost an election and the reality of what does that feel like? What does it feel like to put yourself out there, pour yourself into it, and then go, I lost?
Well, we have to know that it's an election, right? You could lose. I mean, you have to know that going into it. It's thick skin. You know that it's not always personal. People have a value system that they stick to as well. They want to know, are you going to represent them? You can't take it. It's hard not to take it personal because the campaign, the election is hard. Sometimes you feel like you're up against the machine as opposed to just the other person. And sometimes that machine they're going to take anything that's negative and make it 20 times more, or even a positive and make it a negative. I think when you work hard at something and somebody wants to tear down your record as opposed to run on their own record, it does make it difficult. It's just part of it. And to lose, it's hard. Not only because of your own work, but your team's work. It's hard to let down your team when you believe that you had run and worked hard and did everything that you thought you could. I lost the state rep race in 2016 by 564 votes.
Wow.
And it's hard to swallow, but it's who the people wanted. And then they have to decide if that's the person they continue. I ran again in 2018 against the same race. I lost by, I can't remember exactly, 1,300, 1,400. So they clearly wanted that representative there. And but again, it can get negative. It gets hard. It's hard on your family sometimes when you're running a state race, different than a local race. You try to shield your kids and all of that, but it doesn't always work. And I think you just have to know what you're getting yourself into. But it can weigh on you a little bit, and you have to get out of your own head and realize what's important is to remind people to continue to do so. And I think the only way that changes for somebody like Eddy, different than myself, because when I first ran, I was, I think, 34 at the time. I have twins, again, who are 25. But the youth council, and Gresham has one as well, starting a youth council in Happy Valley was probably my single most valuable thing that I feel like I contributed to the community when I left, was to have these youth sit side by side in order, and this was the charge I gave the very first council, and I started when I was mayor in 2010, is when you leave, and you will leave probably to go off to college if you can, or go move somewhere else, or even if you stay. When you come home, and you'll want to maybe come home, because I think Happy Valley is a great place and Oregon's a great place to live, what do you want your community to look like? And if that's what you want it to look like when you come home, you have to start today investing now. So what do the high schoolers of the community think is important today? Okay. What do they value? Start putting the work in now so that when they come home, if they choose to run for council, they'll have that foundation set already. And that's where we have to change what we're experiencing when we're afraid, because they have to start young to know that representing anybody is not always easy, but it's so doable, and it is the democracy that we have. It is the system that we have. And unless we're going to change that, which I hope we don't, I like the way it's running elected-wise. We got to start with these young people starting to say, I have a voice and I have a value, whatever that is and whatever community they live in, and they start on their schools and they start with all that. It's the most important thing. So for every community, always include your youth, because they are the smartest, brightest, most talented, and they have the best ideas, in my opinion. And I would have taken any of our youth council's ideas and implemented it almost any time, because they were very smart.
So let me then ask what I think I hear 2 things here, and you started speaking towards what was going to be my other question. I want to keep the question of what it feels like, or what it felt like, at least for a bit, to go, I lost or we lost. And then I want to add to it a question of, like, what's one thing that you feel really proud of about what you've been able to do in this position?
Yeah. So I shared that I was disappointed in myself and my community
Yeah.
for a split second.
Okay.
And after a few bottles of champagne that I drank in bed,
Yes.
I started thinking logically.
Yeah, but it usually helps. Yeah.
It always helps.
Yeah,
Not
right,
usually.
logically.
I don't know.
Always.
Never
And
done
I
it.
remember thinking, one, like, I felt good that I worked really hard. And that I carried the water for people's hopes, aspirations. Every donor, every volunteer, every voter that I talked to, I was like, I did right by them. I carried the water for them. I also felt like I did right by my staff and my volunteers. I was like, I tried to show up before them. I tried to show up and stay till they were done. And there wasn't anything that they were doing that I was doing. I found myself cleaning the toilets 2 times in the campaign office. And people were like, what are you doing? I was like, it needs to get done. And we're all a team here.
Yeah.
So I felt like I had done right by them. But then I started to redefine winning and losing. And for me, I was like, winning was, we just developed a bunch of young women and people of color who are now great political operatives, who know how to do a ballot chase, who know how to run a campaign, who know how to manage a budget.
Yeah.
And that's going to be my campaign's contribution to the movement. And so that is a win. The other thing is I ran, when I raised that money, I made sure that I ran as a slate. And I think there was 9 of us on that slate. And everyone on that slate won except one other person. And I was like, that was a win.
Yeah.
Like, the majority of us made it. And then the other piece was the turnout. We got a lot of people who normally don't participate, who are now paying attention and know how to vote and are going to continue voting. And so this is going to change the political landscape. We changed the electorate, which means that we get to change what policies get discussed and what possibilities are available now for the elected leadership to do. And so then I felt really good about that. I was like, this actually won, even though I lost that night. My biggest accomplishment, or the thing that I'm the proudest of, are those minor changes that are C minor. Like, we now provide childcare at city things because we know people have children and we want them to participate. But a lot of the things that we were told were not possible because the electorate that used to be wouldn't support it has changed. Like, we're actually now having conversations about a parks district in Gresham and East Multnomah County and looking at Tualatin Valley as like an example for what we could do. Whereas when I first started, we're like, no one here wants a parks district. No one here wants parks. No one wants to fund it. When the Parks and Metro bond last time around was given to the voters in Gresham, it lost in Gresham. It only had 47% of the vote. This time around, because we changed the electorate, it passed with 51% of the vote. So the people that got engaged with my campaign are still voting, and they're still making their priorities heard. And so that is like the biggest victory, I think, of my election.
So I want to do a couple things right now. I want to move us towards questions, which might mean that it might make sense to bring the lights up. I should say we've tried to take a slightly different approach to how we're taking questions, both with, like, we'll sanitize the microphone in between questions, for example. And instead of asking people to come up over here, my colleague Ben, who is walking up here with both a microphone and some sanitizing wipes, if you have a question, can you raise your hand? I do want to, before we get to questions, can we just say a preliminary, quick, big thanks to Lori and Eddy?
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lord.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll get to say a bigger thank you in a bit. I do want to make a request with questions, that because there are a bunch of people in here and because we want to leave some time at the end for you to talk to each other as well, to try to make your question fairly concise and also with an upward lilt of the voice at the end to indicate that it is indeed a question, would be my request. And maybe say your name at the beginning so we know who you are. And there was a hand right up here somewhere. Great. Thanks.
Oh, you're going to hold it?
He's going to have to
Okay.
hold it so you're not passing it to each other. Yeah, we're trying here.
My name is Michelle. I heard you guys talk about two topics, representation and money in politics. And I'm just in a conflict about those two issues. I want to see more representation across the board, in particular, low-income people. And how does that happen with money in politics?
Great, thank you. And thank you for like a really big question said really clearly and briefly. Yeah. How does representation happen with money in politics?
So I think I heard your question is, if you're wanting to run and you're run for office, is that what you're asking? And you're low income, or are you representing low income people?
Like, they're not going to win because they don't have the money and they don't have the network, the money network.
So the question
to raise
is,
in money.
Like, I went to a candidate forum yesterday, and a guy named Philip Wolf was speaking. He's deaf, and he mentioned while he was speaking that he's on Snap. And I was like, I want to vote for him. I like him, but he's not going to win.
how's he going to get out there?
Oh, I
How
see.
does it become realistic that this isn't too big a barrier?
Yeah.
What office was he running for?
City Council, Portland City Council.
Portland
position
City
one.
Council. Right, so you have to build coalitions, because it doesn't always, I mean, certainly money will come if the message is you're representing a certain community, right? One of the things that I'm confident probably most city councilors do in your community, now Portland, obviously such a large city, right, to run, but building coalitions. For instance, how can you do that? Let's just see, dog lovers for Lori. I'm just throwing out examples, not anything specific. Cat lovers for Lori. You have to go and find those specific people who will then talk to their network. Because, I mean, that is the key, right? We only know so many people individually. You have to decide who relates to you, who connects to you, and will you carry their water on whatever that mission is, and have them build small coalitions at first. Those are those house parties that you that started there, right? Everybody has this house party, you're thinking 10 people are going to come. I'm not going to win, right? I'm not going to represent that. Maybe get other people who are in the similar situation, who have run before, who have a voice amongst a bigger group that they can talk to, and have you meet those people. You will have to get past those barriers, or they will have to get past those barriers of who do they relate to, because it's name ID most of the time. Voters are smart, but sometimes they get a little lazy when they feel they're not going to win, so I'm not going to go out and take the time to learn who they are. It isn't so much that I'm going to vote, but if it takes time, and if there's no money to tell you who we are, we got to bring people to us to listen to who we are. And that takes a lot more legwork. It takes a lot more groundwork. And we talked about knocking doors. On the state representative race, I personally knocked 12,000 doors. It's 3 hours a day, every single day, on top of your job or your whatever. That takes a lot of commitment and work to get up every single day and go do that. But that's what replaces money, is the legwork. And you just have to have yourself and other people who will say, I'm going to go introduce you to here, and they're going to take 10 people to do that. I wish there was another way, but you have to get to the voters and let them tell their story about how that's going to work.
Eddie, when you hear Michelle's question about money and representation.
It's a great question. And I was really, I was reading a report about Seattle did this voucher system for their city council races, where every person in the city was given a $200 voucher. And your job as a candidate was to go try to get votes and collect those vouchers, and that was the only way that you could get your financing from it. And so I think it's time for us to be exploring on innovative ways of doing this. I think the work that's being done here in Portland is one step in that direction, but I tend to like the voucher system a little bit better. And then the other thing is, when we started East County Rising, People do say it's my PAC. And I remember that from the beginning, I said, I'm going to help create this PAC with community, but I won't be on the board. And I'm going to pick board members that really represent the community. And so that PAC is governed by everyday people who are on SNAP, people who are retired, people who are Muslim, Vietnamese, Latino, African American, queer, seniors, young people in college, and that is who decides who gets recruited to run, who gets endorsed.
And then they build those coalitions to donate money to the PAC to give out to those candidates to run,
Yeah.
right? So it's building those coalitions wherever they are, whether they're through a PAC, through your community, through your friends and family.
And then, I normally, I don't have a problem endorsing candidates. I actually think it's our job as elected officials to spotlight other talent and leaders. And so one of the things that I did this year, and I just released all my endorsements today, was I endorsed everybody that East County Rising did, because I'm like, if the community vetted people in primaries and the community picked these individuals, then that's who I'm going to follow the lead of. I don't operate as an individual political, being. And so I think that those are some things that we could do, is using our position to follow community leadership.
Great. Let's go to that right there. Yeah.
Hi, this question was specifically for Eddy, but Lori, feel free to chime in. My name is Silvia, and my question for you was specifically about the census, based on what you said and how you got all those people that usually don't vote to vote for you. And with the census coming up and so many people, especially the Latino community, being targeted by the administration and try to suppress their participation in the census, what are you doing and other legislators doing, not only in Oregon, but across the country, to try to get those people to participate?
Yeah.
Question mark.
Thank you.
So this is not a planted question, but I actually am chairing the census work for the city of Gresham, and I'm doing it in partnership with Commissioner Hugh Daly of Portland and Lori Stegman for our county. Just this last week signed off on a bunch of material in 7 different languages around the census. We are partnering with East County Rising, who has a 501c3 now, and they've hired an equity census director to do trainings in the community, trainings for elected officials, community members in schools, to get the word out. The other piece of information that we're trying to provide to communities, because you're right, there is harm that has been done, that this administration, federal administration, would get that information and come back and go after undocumented people. And the fear is not just with undocumented people, it's also African American, low-income and poor families who have multiple people living in households that are larger. There's a fear there that there's going to be retaliation if suddenly the 6 people that are living in a 2-bedroom apartment identify themselves, right? What we're trying to put out to the community is that the census doesn't hand over names of individuals to the president. They are getting, get sort of a synopsis of these reports, and those are protected even from the FBI. And so that is giving the community peace of mind that we're going to aggregate the information, we're going to send it to the president. Scary thing is they could do whatever they want with the aggregated information and choose what to present out back to the community. But there's a lot at stake, in Oregon, because of our growth, is slated to getting a new congressional district. So we have more political representation, and it's been driven by a lot of our diversity, right? And growth and diversity and young people, and so.
Can we go, there was a question right up here, yeah. Ben, that's in the 4th row over on this side. Thank you.
Got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
You have to go to the gym after this.
Hi, my name is Kimberly. I guess my question is is piggybacking off of the past 2 questions. Looking at mayoral candidate forums and city commissioner forums here in Portland, I've been going to them, and I can't help but consistently feel this sense of disillusionment of how our government works, especially in Portland. I've only been here 5 years, but it's become really clear to me that Portland is a very liberal, white, we want to sound progressive, but we're not really progressive city. And I was looking into the campaign donation history of all of the sort of top 4 mayoral candidates. And y'all were talking about money, and it's very stark to see which candidate is getting the most money, and it is a cis white man who's already held office. And it's hard for me to feel like we can really have real change in our current system. So do you have any advice for people who feel disillusioned? And how do you talk to other people who similarly feel that disillusionment, people who have felt for a long time like they don't matter?
Thank you. That's powerfully put.
Campaign
Lori.
finance, right? Campaign finance is something that we talk about every cycle in Oregon, and it, usually the party in power, whether it be Democrat or Republican, Republicans right now say campaign finance would be great, right? Because they're not in power, and the Democrats don't want to do it right now because they're in power, and that's the money that runs it. If it was opposite, the Democrats want campaign finance and the Republicans don't because they're in power. So that money is what's speaking to that power, right, on both sides. Once again, you find it in Portland, the donors, right, because we can see it. In Oregon, we can have unlimited amount of campaign finance, which is what the transparency that I think you spoke to earlier. In some other states, if we do campaign finance, all that does is sometimes bring in the dark money, because then they set up PACs from across, and that money is still going to come in and elect those, and now we have no idea where the money comes from. So as far as that solving the, when we feel like we're underrepresented, they're saying things that aren't true, we're starting to see what really happens in a bigger city. And you're talking about, I believe, Mayor Wheelers, who you're mentioning, who's running, and I've sat with him because of being a mayor. We go to the same conferences, and mayors get together. But I don't know, unless campaign finance is adjusted in the state of Oregon to somehow represent the people, because you can't be elected unless you have lots of money or have somebody who supports you. You're running unless you're, start small, and you're going to get name ID. I'm sure you're going to go far in this state of Oregon, where you can now move up the ladder because you are starting, you're going to have name ID. If you start right at Portland and you don't have any name ID, the chances of beating Mayor Wheeler are going to be very slim. Not to mention, you're not getting a lot of candidates because Portland right now is having a lot of issues with who are we? How do we identify? How do we fix it? Who are we anymore? Because it's changed drastically in the 5 years that you have been in the state of Oregon, and I think people are recognizing that. So we'll say this, young people, while we're activists, and that is a problem. You have to show up and vote. How people get elected. Yeah. That it's tough
it was a few weeks ago, and it said that like 50% of people, and when they asked those people, like, well, in what ways? It was something like, then we're going to feel is important. And yes, money, the reason why money is important is because money gets votes, right? But there's other things that get votes, and that get votes more effectively. And that is the relationship building, and that is door to door, and that is making phone calls. And I think about Mayor Bloomberg, right? Yeah. $500 million. And he got good name recognition. But at the end of the day, like, spending money to get name recognition is not a substitute for getting people who believe in you and your message to go door to door and convince their community to vote.
Can I just, on this question, it's interesting to think too about there's the campaign part and there's the actual holding office part. And this may sound weird. This is a slightly revealing comment, so I apologize in advance. One of the ways I got ready for this conversation was to go back and read an essay called Politics is a Vocation by a German social theorist named Max Weber from 1918. That's how I get ready for this stuff. And I actually think he's speaking to the question of disillusionment pretty heavily. And one thing he says pretty clearly at the end, and what I find to be quite inspirational and what you've both been saying, he says politics is the long, slow, boring of hard boards. and that it is hard for many of us to understand what it takes to do that work and remain committed to the dream part of it while thoroughly accepting the limitations. And I hear in your question about disillusionment this question about disappointment all over and how to remain committed to the big hopes while like being so attuned to the reality of everyday politics, what it takes.
For sure.
I think we have time for one more question, if there is one. Well, we have time for two more questions if we can keep them short. Why don't we go here, and then we'll go there, and then we'll still stay here and keep talking, but without microphones. So why don't we start here, and then we'll go over there. Thank you. Thanks, Ben.
Hi there, name's Diego. So this actually question I think will go with like disillusionment, the money, but it was mentioned, you know, a lot of people that run for office, local office, and maintain that local office because no one's opposes them. What about, like, I think to me, I'd feel a bit more at ease if I knew that some of these people going in that had the money or that are retired, like they can only be in office, you know, for X amount of terms, instead of me seeing somebody in there with money who can just sit there as long as no one, you know, actually has the guts to face them. So I think locally, I mean, what about more
Term limits?
more term limits and things like that, so that people who are younger can be like, okay, well, we got X amount of time, you know, I got 4 years to this seat's completely empty. Like, let's start doing something about it now.
Yeah. I think most people would probably agree one way or the other, but that's a charter issue, how your cities all have charters, and the charter states from the time that they were incorporated of what the goals were of the people were at the time, right? I mean, that's what a charter is, and then it gets morphed over time, but that goes to the vote of the people. So I think the City of Happy Valley's charter has been, we were incorporated 50 plus years ago. Most people think we're a brand new city, but we've been incorporated for a long time. That charter has changed a couple of times. That has to go to the vote of the people to change a charter, just like the state of Oregon changes their constitution. That's a charter change. So it depends on what the charter is. For City of Happy Valley, there's no term limits. I'm not sure for Gresham, there's not, but some cities do have term limits. And sometimes, like for instance, the city of Tualatin, Mayor Lou Ogden, who's a friend of mine, he was the mayor for 26 years, right? Small city, it grows, nobody challenges him, he wins every time. Well, they felt like with all that name ID, that nobody was ever going to get to be the mayor. Not necessarily because they disagreed with everything, but they wanted a chance, and there was no chance. And so therefore, what did they do? They built a coalition, they built a PAC, they went out and they changed the charter that put term limits in, and now he's out, and new mayor can come in. So that's really a policy change. It's just, you have to check into what it is. But personally, I think term limits are a good thing, because I do think new blood and new vision and new goals, and cities grow, cities change, and people want to see what reflects them. So, you know, I didn't take offense to it. When I ran for that second seat, I knew I was going to give up my mayor's seat, because I couldn't, the first time, if I lost, I could go back to being the mayor because I was midterm. The second time, I was a choice. I couldn't run for 2 offices. So I had to choose, knowing that, and I thought, risk, reward. I thought my best set of skills would be at the state level at this point if I could win, knowing that I felt like I put in a good 14 years, 6 as council and 8 as mayor, that I was okay to step behind, and knowing people were going to go ahead and take the reins, and the city was going to be just fine without me. We'd like to pat ourselves on the back and think we're the only ones can do it, and that is nonsense. That is ego. Don't let it get in your way. For any councilors, step out of the way and let somebody else take the reins. It's okay to do so.
Eddy, do you want to speak to this, or should we hear one more question?
I mean, sure. I'll share this story because it's funny, but it's also paints a picture of something that's happening in this country at this sort of microcosm. So when, after being elected, one of the first things that I had to do was to vote to reappoint members to our planning commission. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at this commission, so this commission sets sort of planning rules. It's a pretty powerful commission. And that commission, like our council before, was, I think, all men except 1 woman out of 9. And I think maybe 1 person of color on there, maybe. And so the 3 people that were coming before me for reappointment were 3 older white men. one of them had already been on there for 18 years, another one was 26 years. And so I motioned to table their appointments and encourage the staff to go back out and try to find more women and people of color and people from different neighborhoods. And first of all, the things that were told to me were like, women are too busy, Latinos don't really trust government because they come from socialist countries, and our Slavic community doesn't trust government because they come from communist country. It was like a lot of excuses for why these people weren't coming to appoint to these. Anyways, I ended up getting sued by those 3 white men for reverse racism because I was pushing for equity, and they went on the media and were writing letters to the editor that I only cared about race and gender and not about people's qualifications. I mean, they filed a Title VII complaint against me that went to the federal court and down, and spent taxpayers' dollars doing that. And at the end, my message to them was like, I'm like grateful for the 26 years that you've given in volunteerism and service. I'm not asking you to give up power. I'm asking you to share it. Yeah. And they just couldn't wrap their heads around this idea. And so I think that there are some people who will stay because no one runs against them, but then there's others who are like, this is my identity. This is how I relate to this community. This is how I have power, and I'm not trying to give that up or share that with anyone else.
You introduced that as a funny story. I just want to question the adjective choice.
I mean, you have to find the humor in this
there
stuff,
you
right?
go. That sounds right.
I'll write a book one day, tell all.
Let's go one more question before we pose a question to you to discuss with each other.
Hi, my name is Tiffany, and it's really not a question, but just a comment. As you speak to disillusion, I feel like, and this is just me, my thoughts, but I feel like there's a lot of disillusion going on as far as it relates to the people having this whole thing about white men being in power and this, that, and the other, and how did 2 white men make it to the race? Here's what I believe to be the reality. The system is designed that way. So to wonder how did it happen, it to me is a disillusion, because it happened because it's designed that way. What I see as it relates to this whole women's movement, I'm just going to tie it all in together. This women's movement has nothing to do with somebody that looks like me. So let's get that clear. That's another disillusion. And the fact about how are white men holding their power, not only is the system set up that way, but when the rubber hits the road, the white women protect the patriarchy. So then you get into that question of what is the person's real capacity to really stand with people that look like me, the people that look like you, when the going gets tough. So there's a lot of intersection in the conversations and the thought process that needs to be happening. Another thing that I think is a disillusion is, okay, so now we have the attention of people about white men being in power, white men this. I don't feel like we have told them what to do next. And so we're delusional if we think that we're going to be able to keep saying this, that, and the other, and women rise, and people of color rise, and this and other, and we don't ever tell them what to do next. Because what's going to happen, they're going to sit back and look at each other, and they're going to go like, I'm running this show. We have given them time, and they haven't, so back to business as usual. Okay. And so that's, I guess, these conversations, I'm in a lot of these conversations, and they are just becoming stressful to me. Yeah. Because A, I don't really see me in the women's movement. B, I think they're delusional because we're not giving people the next steps. So, okay, what do we want you to do? And so they kind of just become questions of just and comments of, they kind of become like bashing to me because you don't tell people what you want them to do next. And so, I mean, I guess it's just a comment about being delusional. And this is delusional.
So
Like,
it's a really helpful comment, and I do hear a question. I hear a question about next steps. And so can I make that the last question we use microphones for, and that is the question of next steps in response to what you just said. When you think about next steps there, where would you point people? That's for either of you.
I would point people, first of all, to you have a very specific action that you're wanting to, because it's baby steps. That might seem trivial to some, right? The conversations seem over and over and over again. That's what I'm hearing from you, that I'm so tired, but I don't know what to do next. I would imagine that there's a fire in you from some specific reason that really brings you here again to say, is this going to change? Is the conversation going to change? What is that? Well, I don't, can I ask you, what is that fire in you?
I don't have the issue. I mean, I know, like, it's not my issue. I'm basically putting out there to this whole women's movement, because as I said, that doesn't include me. Let's be real clear about that. That doesn't include me. So, okay, women, what do you want these white men to do next? Okay, let me even be more clear. Okay, white women, what do you want your white men to do next? Because it doesn't include me.
Can we point that? I mean, I feel like, in a way, the story that you just told tees up that question, the story, Eddie, that you just told. And I don't know how you respond to this. What do you do next?
I think first I completely want to validate everything you said, that these are systemic things that we're dealing with, and that's why I said at the beginning, we can't divorce why someone's afraid or doesn't run for office from sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia, right? Like, and the systems that have been created to keep people at the margins. So I'm really fortunate to have a friend who is now like this incredible national figure named Stacey Abrams. And she's come to Oregon, she's stayed at her home. Like, I just texted her a few days ago. And Stacey Abrams turned out more Black voters than any other state in this, and any other candidate in this country's history, including Barack Obama. And it wasn't just that she was a Black woman who ran. So representation is important, and it does matter, and people saw themselves in her, but she was authentic in the issues and the ways that she talked about things that resonated with Black people. The other thing is she put a whole infrastructure in place. She didn't wake up one day and decide to run. She built the infrastructure over 10 years before people in this country knew who Stacey Abrams was. And she did that by investing year in and year out in registering, turning out Black voters and people of color, and delivering to these communities who have been told over and over, vote for us, we have promises for you, and then people don't ever come back to make right on those promises. One of the things that I talk about in my tip sheet is that as a leader, you gotta take direction and leadership from the community. And so when I got sworn in, there was this Black CDC in Gresham called Beyond Black. And they've been there for a long time. They've been doing great work, but they've been invisible to the leadership in the community. And one of the first things they said was like, Eddie, let's work together to have a proclamation and make a Juneteenth event here in Gresham. And I was like, sure. So every week I would show up to the planning meeting. I think Hugh and I were like the only non-Black people in the room. And we carried that proclamation through the county and then to the city. We had over 2,000 Black families come to our Juneteenth event in Gresham. It was important not because this community wasn't already doing good work and was a tight network. It was because it shed visibility and legitimacy. We see you, we know you're here, and we're gonna back you up. And I think when people run for office and get elected, they think that their job with the community is done. Like, now it's my turn to carry out all of my policy ideas and do all of my fun stuff, and then they never go back to check in with the community. And the
Communities
times
change, communities evolve, and we're seeing it.
Yeah.
I mean, think about the growth of anywhere, right? Communities evolve, and sometimes when we look outside, I mean, if this entire room didn't have sight, we would dig deeper, right? And we would say, okay, well, let's not look at color, let's look at values and goals and integrity. Where do we come from? Families are the core, and I will tell you, people will go right to their family values, how they were raised or how they're raising their family when they want to appeal to the humanitarian side of any of us. Of course, then we have to overlay, because what people see is how people, judge. And that's where I think the breakdown happens in what we're talking about here. But we have to start to think about in our community, how do we want to raise our families? And that doesn't mean always your blood family, it's your community family, right? Where do you want to be a part of? And all of that comes with how we build coalitions and move forward and change then the way our communities look to represent the people who are either here or next to us. And I always say, it's not always where we are, it's who we touch and where we pass through that we also have to care about. And every day we pass through each other's lives, and we almost don't even recognize that we're doing that, right? We go home, we shut our garages, and then go home, and it's craziness. And we have to start to say, wait a minute, this is our family. That's everywhere that we are. So live it, touch it, pass through it. We should care about it.
Just to finish my answer to you, people who are in positions of privilege and power need to do our own work, right? So as men, we got to do our work. As white people need to do their work around the ways that unintentionally or intentionally people perpetuate sexism and racism. And we can't expect, and we shouldn't ask women and people of color to do that for us. And the other thing that we have to do, and I have tons of books that I recommend for folks. I think White Fragility is a good starting point. So you want to talk about race. I mean, I can share those with people. But the other thing is those of us who are already in leadership have to figure out that people have been put at the margins for a long time in this country. And we have to do whatever we can to center those voices. And so we actually need the direction and to give power and share power with Black women and follow their leadership, right? And show up. But again, while doing our own work, so that we can heal, but also know that we're coming into a relationship with hundreds of years of racism and sexism.
So I want to do 3 quick things by way of closing. The first is, in just a moment, we're gonna run a question up here, which for those of you who want to stay, we have carefully arranged food in the back that you would only touch your own food, kind of food. So if you want to stay and share food with each other, and the question, if you need, talk to someone you don't know, is one thing we want to encourage for people that stay. And here's a question you might talk about is, what's the best reason to run for office? And what's one strong reason not to? If you need some way to start talking to someone that you don't yet know. So what's the best reason to run for office, and what's one strong reason not to? Or just talk to someone you don't know about what you've heard Eddy and Lori talking about. I want to let you know that our next one of these is going to be on May 13th. Again, part of Making Democracy is a series. The theme that night will be democracy and the internet. It's possible that we'll have to do that one over the internet. We don't know yet. And on that, I guess I want to say, there's been a lot of talk about community. And I think the ways we live in community is one way we do politics. It's more than just Facebook like or watching a particular show. And so I just want to go back to the slides that were up there before. Oregon Humanities as an organization convenes people in lots of different ways, sometimes face-to-face through things like the Conversation Project this program, a program called Bridging Oregon, but also online and on the page. We try to get people hearing stories that are different from their own perspectives, different from their own, maybe writing letters to each other through a program called Danger. So I just want to encourage you, if
And it's called What Can They Do to You? What can they do to you? Whatever they want. They can set you up, they can bust you, they can break your fingers, they can burn your brain with electricity, blur you with drugs till you can't walk, can't remember. They can take your child, they can wall up your lover. They can do anything you can't stop them from doing. How can you stop them? Alone? You can fight, you can refuse, you can take what revenge you can, but they'll roll over. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds, and hold a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration, 100 fill a hall, 1,000 have solidarity in your own newsletter, 10,000 power in your own paper, 100,000 media, 10 million in your own country. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again and they said no. It starts when you say we and know who you mean, and each day you mean one more.
let's call it good there. Thanks again. Yeah.